So this evening we are reading from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, text 40. Indriyāṇi mano buddhiḥ asyādhiṣṭhānam ucyate etair vimohayaty jñānam āvṛtya dehinam. Thank you. Indriyāṇi, the senses. Manaḥ, the mind. Buddhiḥ, the intelligence. Asya, of this lust. Adhiṣṭhānam, sitting place. Ucyate, is called. Etaiḥ, by all these. Vimohayati, bewilders. eṣaḥ, this lust. Jñānam, knowledge. āvṛtya, covering. Dehinam, of the embodied. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. Purport. The enemy has captured different strategic positions in the body of the conditioned soul. And therefore Lord Kṛṣṇa is giving hints of those places, so that one who wants to conquer the enemy may know where he can be found. Mind is the center of all the activities of the senses. And thus when we hear about sense objects, the mind generally becomes a reservoir of all ideas of sense gratification. And as a result, the mind and the senses become the repositories of lust. Next, the intelligence department becomes the capital of such lustful propensities. Intelligence is the immediate next-door neighbor of the spirit soul. Lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire the false ego and identify itself with matter, and thus with the mind and the senses. The spirit soul becomes addicted to enjoying the material senses and mistakes this as true happiness. This false identification of the spirit soul is very nicely explained in the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam 10:84-13. Yasyatma buddhi kune pitri datuke svadi kalatadi shubhoma ichyadi yatirtha buddhi salilena kahichich janeshva bhigyeshu sa eva gokara. A human being who identifies this body made of three elements with his self, who considers the products of the body to be his kinsmen, who considers the land of birth worshipable, and who goes to the place of pilgrimage simply to take a bath rather than meet men of transcendental knowledge there, is to be considered like an ass or a cow. Om Agnati Mirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagajatam Sagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishyakan Vitamscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gorange Radhe Brindavanishvare Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Tap Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, everybody. Thank you for being here to this evening's Bhagavad Gita class. We're very lucky. We're allowed to sit in AC, so it's nice and cool. We're all very comfortable. I admire the commitment of the devotees here in Vrindavan. You know, despite 45 degrees heat, everybody's doing their services with much enthusiasm and diligence. So it's amazing to be in this atmosphere. Anyhow, so we're speaking on the third chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which is entitled Karma Yoga, or the performance of varnashram duties. And the third chapter is divided into 4 topics, and we are now covering the 4th topic of this chapter, which is entitled, it started already with text 36 and goes to the end of the chapter, of course, and it's entitled Beware of Lust and Anger. And it's actually, I would say, the single most important part of the Bhagavad Gita. Because as we can understand, Srila Prabhupada was teaching in the preface to the Nectar of Instruction that in all spiritual affairs, the most important is mind and sense control. And he's saying unless one learns to control the mind and the senses, there's no question of making any Krishna conscious progress, any transcendental progress. So, in other words, what that means, when we're studying Bhagavad Gita or any of our Shastras, it's not just a theoretical understanding or something that we learn off by heart so that we can become good preachers ourselves, or, you know, maybe even chastise younger devotees or whatever, or feel ourselves more learned and better. The most important thing is that step by step, we don't just only learn the knowledge, but we have to apply it. So unless we apply these teachings that Krishna is giving to Arjuna here, particularly from text 36 through to the end, actually we won't get the full benefit of studying Bhagavad Gita. We won't make tangible spiritual advancement. So it's a very, very important topic. In what I love in the Purport, you know, Srila Prabhupada, he has some very unique ways of expressing himself, which are very endearing. But he's immediately pointing out what the enemy is. He's saying the real enemy is this lust that is situated within our heart. And which is interesting because we have to remember the scene. You know, Krishna is speaking to Arjuna sitting on a chariot, a war chariot on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And Arjuna particularly asked Krishna to stop and let him assess the army, the opposing army. Who is the enemy? But here is Krishna is immediately pointing out, never mind, that's not really the enemy. The enemy is, in Prabhupada says, it's the eternal enemy. Now, eternal in the sense, as long as we're caught up in our conditioned life. Because in the spiritual world, of course, this material, mundane lust doesn't exist. So it's an internal enemy that we have to face. We have to face our demons, as they say. We have to go through these stages of anatta nivritti to progress to higher levels. And Prabhupada points out how this enemy is situated in strategic positions. So just like the army on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, I'm not so expert with all of these things, but it's astonishing, Aukshahinis and this division and so many elephants and so many warriors. And of course, the Pandava army was way outnumbered by Duryodhana's army. And it's all very strategic and it's very scientific how it's set up. So similarly, this particular enemy called lust is very cleverly, very strategically positioned in the body. And Prabhupada is explaining it's the mind, the senses, and the intelligence. So the mind, as we can understand, is in charge of the senses. First of all, we know from the Bhagavad Gita, of course, how we have our body is made up of 5 gross material elements and 3 subtle. So they are material elements. We're not like forever and ever stuck with it, or we don't need to identify with them. It's just a makeup, an ingredient of this material body. So these 3 subtle elements are the mind, intelligence, and false ego, like that. So this is important to understand, because if we get overwhelmed, or we lose our path, or we get going through a challenging situation, we can always find solace in these teachings that, hang on a minute, no, I'm not this mind, I'm not this mundane intelligence, and I don't want to be a part of my false ego. So the mind is in charge of our senses. What does that mean? The mind is always thinking in such a way of how to enjoy the senses. So because of our conditioning, having been through millions of material bodies, our mind, which travels from one body to the next along with us, our subtle body carries us to our next birth. So then the mind has become conditioned by seeking enjoyment for the senses in the wrong places. So when we come to Krishna consciousness, we're retraining our mind. No, hang on a minute, you've done there, you've been there, and it really only just brings suffering. Just think over it again. And instead of going to some restaurant, go to the temple, take prasadam, and like that, we're retraining our mind, we're rewiring. So Prabhupada is saying the mind has become the reservoir of all ideas of sense gratification. I remember reading in the first canto in a purport, where Prabhupada said the living entity will not stop to go to any kind of degradation as long as it promises sense gratification. And we know that, we were forced to take bodies of pigs and monkeys and snakes and amoeba and trees and all of that. We've been through all of that because of this constant seeking of enjoyment through the particular senses of those particular bodies that we were inhabiting. And Prabhupada says next, the intelligence becomes the capital of such lustful propensities. He says lusty intelligence, and that's of course a key word in the devotee community. Lusty intelligence. What does that mean? The function of the intelligence is to discriminate. The mind is just making proposals. Hey, try this. Hey, try that. Why don't you go here? Let's do this. Always trying to make some adjustments of accepting and rejecting. However, above the mind is the intelligence. So the intelligence discriminates. Hang on a minute. No, you might think that this is enjoyment, but I know better now, and I'm going to discriminate and not engage in these activities. I'm going to choose Krishna conscious activities. So as long as we're identifying with this material body, we are in the illusion of thinking to cater to the whims of the mind so that we can enjoy, because in the material conditioning, that's what we're trained. We're thinking we're going to have a happy life the more we can enjoy this body. And however, so this lusty intelligence is developed, and again through the training of Krishna consciousness we learn to undo all of that, and we learn to use our intelligence correctly through the eyes of sadhu, guru and shastra. So, Prabhupada says, lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul. The spirit soul has got nothing to do with material enjoyment. But the lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire the false ego and identify itself with matter, and thus with the mind and the senses. So this is where we've all gone wrong. So we have to undo that. So this enjoying, trying to enjoy the senses, of course, is a kind of an addiction, because we've been trying to do it since time immemorial. And we've been always mistaking it for true happiness. So this word lust comes up. And it's an interesting word. Of course, in the English language now it's commonly not, we don't hear it on a daily basis. But lust generally, is identified with sexual activities. But interestingly enough, I thought about it. In the German language, you might have heard of the word Wanderlust. That's actually a German word, Wanderlust. That's how they say it in Germany. And it's interesting, because our language that we use is also a reflection of our consciousness. Where we are at, it will come out in our language. So in the German language, you can say, for example, I have now lust for an ice cream, or I have lust to go to a cinema and watch a movie, or I have lust to go traveling on a holiday. It sounds strange in English, but in English we would probably better say, well, I would like, or I have a desire, or I have a wish to go and do these things. But in the German language, you can actually use this word lust. And it shows, it completely reflects this illusion that, yes, I'm in this body and I will need to enjoy this body, and that's the purpose of life. That whatever I do, it has to give me enjoyment. Some years ago, I hadn't been back to Australia for some time, and everywhere I went, like usually when you greet somebody, you say hello, you say goodbye. But the language reflects of what's the consciousness, the mentality of the people in general. And everywhere I went, instead of people saying hello or goodbye, they said, enjoy. And I even saw big billboards up, enjoy. So the whole training and conditioning is, to get maximum enjoyment. And of course, like I mentioned, Prabhupada says lust is the highest enjoyment of lust, of course, in the sexual activities. But when you think about it, the act of sex is really only just a few moments. But the whole preparation for it, the whole setup for it, the whole consciousness to achieve it, the anticipation of the hope to enjoy in this way, this is what takes up the consciousness of conditioned souls, the material persons. So it's this spirit of enjoyment that we are addressing. Prabhupada mentions in the Nectar of Devotion, when he explains in chapter 10 how Krishna gives some diminished suffering to the devotees, and one of the reasons is to curb this enjoying spirit, because it's this enjoying spirit that's keeping us shackled to this material world. It is explained, karma, that's the Sanskrit word for lust, karma is an intense thirst to satisfy the senses. Like I said, it's an obsession, it's an addiction. People are completely immersed in that idea to satisfy their senses. And that is material lust. Now, there's such a thing as spiritual karma or lust. That is an intense thirst. It's the same intensity, if not more. It's an intense thirst to satisfy Krishna's senses. So that's the switch over that we have to make, to come from the conditioned life to the spiritual life, to stop this material sense gratification and understand how to satisfy Krishna's senses, how to give him pleasure, because that's our eternal function actually, and it will make us happy. It's just like we used to celebrate Christmas when I was a child, and it's the single most important, it's a very beautiful festival too. And when I was a child, I grew up with the idea that like we didn't go shopping, to buy Christmas presents. Like now it's become like completely insane, shopping frenzy, to the weeks be leading up to Christmas, and people are spending so much money. But actually, we had the idea that if you really want to show your love or appreciation to somebody, especially to your family, you spend time and you craft something. You create something, you knit some mittens, or you make a mat, or you, like that, you do some artwork. And then that absorption in creating this beautiful gift for somebody who's dear to you, you develop affection and a relationship. And then when you give that gift, you can't actually even wait for the Christmas day, because you're getting so much pleasure from giving. So for me, the only way I can understand the difference between lust and love in the spiritual world, like the gopis have, is because they're getting such pleasure in constantly being only absorbed and giving pleasure to Krishna. And that's their highest happiness. So, yes, in Nectar of Devotion, Srila Prabhupada tells about this lust and love. And he says it's like iron and gold. Both are metal, but the value of the metal, there's a vast difference. The lust, or like this intense thirst to satisfy one's own senses, of course is very selfish. And Prabhupada calls it common. It's very ordinary, it's nothing special. Whereas the love is compared to gold, love for Krishna is compared to gold. It's selfless and it's highly valued. Even in the material world, if somebody is selflessly giving himself to some cause or some service, he's very much appreciated. So in the spiritual world, it looks like apparent selfishness. When the gopis, they're dressing themselves very nicely, they're ornamenting themselves, they're very excited to meet Krishna, they're very excited to do these different services. And it seems selfish because they're also eager, to be with Krishna. But it is explained Krishna becomes happy when he sees his devotee is happy. Therefore, this is a really nice sentence, we have to understand that as devotees, that Krishna becomes happy when we are happy. It's not just that we're thinking to make Krishna happy, but Krishna is thinking of us too, and he wants us to be happy in his service. Therefore, the residents of Vrindavan sometimes seem to endeavor for their own happiness. Their true motive is only to please Krishna. And Prabhupada explains, Srila Rupa Goswami uses the word lust figuratively. He tries to communicate the intensity of the gopis' service attitude by comparing it to the most intense desire a conditioned soul can understand, and that is lust. Here in the material world, we all have, if not in this life, then definitely in previous lives, we've had this experience of burning fire in the heart that is called lust. And it is so strong, it's such a powerful energy, it forces us to act. Or like, Krishna is telling to Arjuna later in the 6th chapter, I'll just try and find it. I think it's 6:34. There's so many instructions, of course, in the Bhagavad Gita on the mind and how to control the mind. So it's definitely a very important topic. But yes, in chapter 6, text 34, Arjuna is kind of complaining, like, you're telling me to control this mind, but he's saying, for the mind is restless, turbulent, obstinate, and very strong, O Kṛṣṇa. And to subdue it, I think, is more difficult than controlling the wind. So even by force, we don't seemingly have to have any control. We're forced to act in so many ways because of this enemy called lust. Or as Krishna says in chapter 2, but I can't exactly remember the number now, but he's saying, Arjuna is saying, to control this, I can't remember the number right now. I'll find it in a moment. But Krishna is explaining that even if you just focus on one of the senses, to satisfy one of the senses, it's like immediately the mind attaches, the intelligence becomes overwhelmed, and you're overpowered. You're actually overpowered. So how to deal with this? How to turn this lust into love? So we just learned, we're talking about the same intensity, and that's why Rupa Goswami is calling it lust, because we can identify with that feeling of intensity. So he wants us to take that same feeling of intensity and just give it to Krishna instead. We don't have to deny it. We don't have to pretend it doesn't exist, or we don't have to be afraid of it, or whatever. We just have to face it and understand, okay, this is how it works, and so now how to deal with it, the acharyas are telling us. So I choose that same emotion, that same feeling, and I just simply place it at the lotus feet of Krishna. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita in Adi Lila 4, text 165, it is stated, Atmendriya priti vancha tare boli kama, Krishnendriya priti icha dare prema nama. The desire to gratify one's own senses is kama, or lust. But the desire to please the senses of Lord Kṛṣṇa is prema, or love. In the Purport, Prabhupada says that the gopis, they have pure love for Kṛṣṇa. And he says for them there was no question of sexual love based on sense gratification. Their only engagement in life was to see Kṛṣṇa happy in all respects, regardless of their own personal interest. This is where it comes sticky. So we don't just do it when it suits us, or when we feel like it, or when everybody's watching, whatever. We have to come to this point of wanting to please Kṛṣṇa, Guru and Gauranga at all times, even if it doesn't suit me, if it's not really satisfying to me. Regardless of their own personal interest, they dedicated their souls only for the satisfaction of the personality of Godhead Kṛṣṇa. There was not the slightest tinge of sexual love between the gopis and Kṛṣṇa. So we know in the material world, Prabhupada also speaks about this extended sense gratification. And he gives quite a list what that extended sense gratification is. Because like I said, yes, Prabhupada explains how the highest pleasure in the material world is sex. But there's so much involved, leading up to it, and it can also manifest in subtle ways. He says just like one, by wanting one's own popularity, wanting fatherhood, wealth, or it's even performed undercover, under the cover of public welfare, nationalism, religion, altruism, ethical codes, health directions, fruitive actions, personal comfort, liberation, family affection, and on and on and on. He gives quite a list. And it's very tricky to be able to accept and understand this correctly, because even from the Varnashram point sense of view, well, what's wrong with welfare activities? Or what's wrong with taking care of one's family? Or what's wrong with being religious or health conscious? You might question, like, why? Why is this so bad? It's not that it's bad. It's the consciousness behind it. If our consciousness is for our own personal satisfaction, then that's what's wrong with the activity. But the same activity, if we're performing it in the consciousness of giving pleasure to Krishna as a matter of duty, then it helps us to become elevated and free from this material entanglement. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada gives a quote from the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, stating that if you're thinking the byproducts of your body, to be your kinsman, or if you're thinking the land of your birth is worshipable, or if you're going to places of pilgrimages just to take a bath, you're really no better than an ass or a cow. It's quite a heavy statement. So again, because the consciousness behind the activity is in the wrong place, that's what's being pointed out. Really, okay, we have family, we have kinsmen, to protect them for the pleasure of Krishna, to help them or train them in the service of Krishna. Yes, okay, we have our place of birth, and we respect that, but we are not becoming attached. We're not doing our activities because which place of birth? From which life? In which country? In what species? How much attachment you're going to do in the name of altruism or nationalism just because you were born in a particular place? I mean, it's ridiculous, and we all know that. And especially in this day and age, for example, now, with this war going on between Russia and Ukraine, it's throwing everybody into a spin, because people in Russia have family in Ukraine. People in Ukraine have family in Russia. Again, in Germany, on the news now, you find German Russians, or Russian Germans, people that have come from Russia and settled in Germany, they're speaking perfect German. They've integrated into the society, have been there for 20 and more years. Their children have grown up there, but now suddenly they're Russians again. And are they for the war or against the war? The whole thing is just ridiculous. Anyway, I checked the purport to this verse that Srila Prabhupada is giving in the purport of this verse today, and there he actually quotes a nice verse from Ujjvala Linamali. It's a book by Srila Rupa Goswami, a follow-up of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, where in depth and in great detail the rasas and all the relationships and all the personalities are described in the spiritual world. It's a very, very beautiful verse that is actually particularly describing the love between Radha and Krishna, but it's also given as a definition, what is that love? So what is love? In the material world, the idea of love is very contorted, it's very perverse, it's very abstract, it's very strange, bizarre, what people identify as love. And here the definition of what is love is given. And of course there's many other quotes, but Prabhupada is giving this quote. And it says, if there's ample reason for dissolution of a conjugal relationship, and yet such a dissolution does not take place, such a relationship of intimate love is called pure. So you have to really meditate on this verse actually. It deserves a deep meditation. I remember when I was a teenage girl, I used to lie with my other girlfriends, as we do. Maybe the men, they won't know this, so I'm just telling a secret. But young girls, they like to stay up all night and just talk. What will your lover be like? Will he be like that? No, I like this, I like that. Oh, what will it be to have that love? Will it be like this? Will he love me no matter what, even when I get old, or when I look big and fat, when I'm pregnant? We imagining, we have these dreams of what this pure love is going to be, until we actually get into a relationship and wake up to some rude, and crude awakening of the reality. But you dream like that when you're a young girl, isn't it? I mean, all the love movies are about that. What will my hero be? So here, I just say it again, if there's ample reason for the disillusion, there's so many reasons why this relationship is not giving me the reward, or it's not giving me what I thought it was going to be, of a conjugal relationship, and yet such a dissolution does not take place. Such a relationship of intimate love is called pure. And as I said, this verse actually describes, of course, the pure love between Radha and Krishna. There were many times reasons, I feel, Radharani had every right to completely reject Krishna, isn't it? When he just dropped her in the middle of the forest. There's plenty of times Radharani had absolute right, and she does get angry, she goes into man, to reject Krishna because he came late, or he was with some other lady, or played some other tricks, isn't it? But it doesn't. Actually, it only deepens their love. So how is it? We're speaking here in the 3rd chapter of how to control the mind and the senses. How can we really do it? And then, of course, ultimately in the 18th chapter, 1865, when Krishna speaks, Man mana bhavamat bhakto, always think of me. So instead of occupying the mind of thinking of this, that, and the other, Krishna is actually telling, no, you have to think of me. How will I get anything done? How will I love my family? How will I do this, that, and the other? How can I do my work if I only think of Krishna? But this is the order. This is the highest. This is actually the essence. It's the confidential knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita that Krishna is giving. Please, just think of me. So, my revered spiritual master would point out, he would say, how is it possible unless you have actually love for Krishna? When you have love for somebody, if I fall in love with somebody, my mother or my father doesn't have to tell me, okay, now you're in love, okay, he will be your husband. Now whatever you do, you have to always think of him, okay? There's no need to say that, because I'm in love. So I'm always sleeping, eating, sitting, going here, I'm dreaming about my lover. So we have to do the same with Krishna. That whatever we're doing, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is saying like that in Chaitanya Bhagavat, whatever you do while eating, while sleeping, even, whatever your activities are, think of Krishna. And so initially, we're doing it by practice, we're forcing our mind, we are practicing it. But then it has to come to this point of spontaneous, where we uncover our natural love for Krishna, and we quite easily and happily always think about Krishna. So keep me in your mind. Drive out all other thoughts, Krishna is saying. Constantly think of me. So without love, there's no possibility of doing this. But Krishna is the only object of love. But no, my Gurudev would say, Sutta mita ramani ra chinta. Stupid mind is thinking of wife, son, daughter, etc. You've developed affection for them and not for Krishna. You've put your body and bodily relations on the platform of love. You've put your body and bodily relations on the platform of love. This is where we made the mistake. Now if you put Krishna on the platform of love, that doesn't mean you don't love anybody else. Actually, it's better. You're loving Krishna, and you will be able to give your love to everyone in your life in an appropriate and correct way, because it's in relationship to Krishna, and everybody has an eternal loving relationship with Krishna. So if you put Krishna, who is the object of love, on the platform of love, then you will get an unlimited, eternal, perfect, loving relationship. That's what we all want. So if we can put Krishna on the platform of love, through practicing devotional service, our mind will automatically become purified and retrained, and we will be able to see it correctly, because, like I said before, the mind will only think how to give pleasure to the senses. It's like a monkey, an unruly child. Any mother that has raised children, fathers too, they know, for example, you don't give so many sweets, you don't feed so much sugar to a child, because his or her little senses will completely go out of control and be very unruly and naughty and mischievous. Any mother knows, if I don't give positive engagement, the child will do mischief, especially little boys. Prabhupada says naughtiness is a sign of intelligence. So children have very good intelligence, but they will use their intelligence how to do mischief. So then the parents have to give that training. So similarly, we're doing this retraining. And it's a very grave responsibility, because, as we were saying at the beginning of the class, the enemy is not outside, the enemy is inside. So we mustn't do Shanga or Asat Sangha. My Gurudev would explain, Asat Sangha doesn't just mean not sitting next to a particular person. Asat Sangha means to stop thinking about your material desires. You might be sitting in the class, you might be coming to the holy tirtha, and even be with devotees. But if in your mind you're actually holding on to your own material desires, you're doing your own asat sangha. You're not really getting benefit from being in the class or being in the holy dham. So we have a responsibility to ourselves and to each other to seriously practice this mind and sense control, because I need your association. I need my own association. In this heat, or when we had the lockdown, we spent so many hours alone in our room. So what kind of association am I giving to myself, you see? So I wanted to read something beautiful, because Krishna consciousness is very beautiful, and it's all optimism. There's this beautiful song given by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. I won't torture you in trying to sing the tune, because I don't actually know the tune. So I'll just read the translation, but please hear, please listen, because it's very, very beautiful. It's in glorification of the holy name. Because we have to learn this smaranam, we have to remember, we have to learn to remember, meditate, think of Krishna. So the translation goes like this. What power does the name of Krishna possess? My heart constantly burns in the fire of worldly desires, just like a desert scorched by the rays of the sun. Somehow, by the grace of Sadhu and Guru, the holy name of Krishna, with its infinite prospect, has entered through the holes of my ears and reached the plane of my heart. And there, with some peculiar hope, with infinite auspicious possibilities, it touched my heart with a new kind of nectar. New hope is aroused by that sound. Then by force it comes from the heart towards the tongue. Not that by the endeavor of my tongue I'm producing that sound. No. What came from the heart of a saint through my ear entered my heart, and that forcibly appeared on my tongue and began to dance. That is the holy name proper. It descends from above. It cannot be produced by the material tongue. Its source is above. And through an agent of the Absolute, it comes through the ear to the heart. From the heart, it gathers some sympathy. Then the holy name of Krishna forcibly appears upon the tongue and begins to dance. With great force, it comes to the end of the tongue, and that sweet sound begins its dancing. So we are so tremendously fortunate to be able to be in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement. that, we know he's Krishna himself, but he's come as his own devotee to teach by his example of how to make access of this supreme mercy that he's bestowing on each and every one indiscriminately to achieve this pure love for Krishna just simply by the chanting of the holy name. So just to illustrate again a little bit more of what means selfless love, in Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Leela 3, text 185, is a statement by Srimati Sachimata. When there was this one more meeting in Advaita Acharya's house in Shantipur, and she was there doing cooking, she requested, please, don't go to Vrindavan, please stay in Jagannath Puri, to her son. Because she said, I do not care for my personal happiness, but only for his happiness. Indeed, I accept his happiness as my happiness. So that was the reason why she wanted him to stay in Jagannath Puri, because she just wanted to hear news to make sure he's happy. In Madhya Leela 7, text 34, Lord Nityananda, he says, because he just wanted to stay with Lord Chaitanya in Jagannath Puri, but Lord Chaitanya ordered him to go back to Bengal and preach. And he says, whatever you order is my duty, regardless of whether it results in happiness or unhappiness. And then of course in Antya Leela 20, where the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shikshastakam prayers are given, the mind of Radharani is shown. And she says, and it's so beautiful, I do not mind my personal distress. I only wish for the happiness of Krishna, for his happiness is the goal of my life. However, if he feels great happiness in giving me distress, that distress is the best of my happiness. It's inconceivable. But these examples and these teachings are given to us to show that this is what is meant by intense thirst for love, what this love is. And we need to, we're so fortunate to have access to this. So it's all optimism. And in turn, Lord Chaitanya in Antya Leela 3:51, he says, and this is the beauty of it, because it's never just a one-way system. This is how fortunate we are to be in contact with Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He doesn't discriminate. And he says, he's crying, and he says to Haridas Thakur, how will these yavanas be delivered? To my great unhappiness, I do not see any way. He is feeling unhappy to see the suffering of the fallen souls, especially the lowest, yavanas and mlechas. That's where I come from. And he feels unhappiness to see our suffering. And he's asking Haridas Thakur, please give me the answer. And of course, in turn, Haridas Thakur speaks the glories of the holy name, and how by giving this holy name that we've just heard from Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that descends from above, because it's the mantra of Srimati Radharani. And it's given to us through the ears by the pure devotee, and has entered in our heart and had the desired effect and turned our lust into love, and we're able to access Krishna Prema. So Lord Chaitanya is Patita Pavan Hetu Tavavata. So we are the lowest, but he's the savior of the most low. So Lord Chaitanya is always thinking about the deliverance of the fallen souls. Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauradishe Namo Namaha. So many more things I would have loved to say, but I'd just like to conclude. Dear devotees, I beg you to be very supportive of each other. Don't be critical, don't be judgmental, don't be envious, don't be competitive. We're all in the same boat. We're conditioned souls trying to turn our lust into love, and some might be better and more experienced or more advanced or this or that, but we need to be very kind. We need to perform this mind and sense control and come from the platform of love, because in the spiritual world these material anxieties and lust and suffering and envy and all this nastiness doesn't exist. So we need to encourage each other and give strength and nurture to each other by always, because we don't quite know yet what it really means to love Kṛṣṇa, but we can love Krishna's devotee, and we can start off with that by, instead of giving into negativity. Kali Yuga means negativity, Kali Yuga means fear. So instead of feeding into that, try to be in whatever situations you're in, or even before you're speaking a sentence, think first, how can I change this into a positive statement? How can I change this into a positive activity? How can I help this other person so that he or she can come to a more positive state? So we need to practice this for ourselves and for each other to become free from the influence of Kali Yuga. So thank you very much for your time and patience. Thank you for being here this evening. Are there any questions or comments?